before taking in these rankings. These rankings were made purely based off of what has happened going into the season. Top 50 players going into the season is the title. Additionally, there will be no honorable mentions. I considered 80 players for 50 spots. 50 players will get mentioned. In the top right of the screen, you will see my rankings for the NBA players. In the top left will be ESPN's rankings for them. Sometimes I will mention the differential, sometimes I will not. It is important to know which one you're looking at. There will be certain language used throughout this video that will not be explained in great depth right here, but there will be a podcast episode coming out in the coming weeks that will go into greater detail on those tiers and criterias. Additionally, if you have any other disagreements or comments to make, leave them in the description in a civilized manner, and I will like to explain why certain things are ranked the way that they are. Anyway, that'll do it for brief notes. Now to the top 50. Coming in at number 50 for me is Brandon Ingram. Brandon Ingram provides high usage rates at 27% with solid true shooting percentages close to 58%. Brandon Ingram also profiles as a high volume passer at 26% with a solid assist to turnover ratio at 2.2%. This combination of volume scoring and solid passing ability creates a strong candidacy for him to be a top 50 player, even with the lackluster defense, and categorizes him as a tier 3 offensive player. At number 49, I have Lauri Markkanen, who ranked 33rd for ESPN. This differential largely comes with my doubts about Lauri Markkanen's self-creation and teammate creation ability. Only a 9% assist rate with a 1.4 assist to turnover ratio is rather lackluster for volume scores. Additionally, Lauri Markkanen does seem to be quite reliant on being set up by his teammates, although 24% usage rate and 63% true shooting percentage is very undeniable. I rank Lauri Markkanen as a high-end tier 4 offensive player with solid defensive versatility to have him play a little bit higher than some of the lower tier 3s. Fifth, at number 48, I have Scottie Barnes. ESPN ranks him a little higher, but his 24% usage rate and league average true shooting percentage and his rather low assist rate for a number 1 option gives me a little bit of worry about his individual offensive game. Although being a still pretty efficient passer and an excellent on-ball and off-ball defensive player with great defensive versatility lends me Scottie Barnes to rank rather high and be one of the higher-ranking tier 4 offensive players. While his 18% assist rate, 25% usage, and league average true shooting percentage doesn't appear to be a high-end offensive player, last season Franz Wagner improved in all 3 of these categories when Paolo Banchero went to the bench, making him look more like a tier 2 offensive player than the tier 3 offensive player that he is. This being said, in totality, he still grades out as a very solid tier 3 offensive player with solid defensive versatility and solid help defense. A player me and ESPN see eye to eye on is Evan Mobley. Last season, Evan Mobley, like everyone knows, provides almost Defensive Player of the Year caliber defense. Last season, he occupied a usage rate of only 20% and a true shooting percentage at an elite 62.5%. Additionally, he took strides as a playmaker last season, 15% assist rate with assist to turnovers creeping towards 1.8. With this being said, Evan Mobley still doesn't have high volume or good spacing ability, so he does get pushed down the list a little bit because of this. However, I still evaluate him as a mid-tier 4 offensive player with Defensive Player of the Year caliber upside, even though he typically lands just below that. Even though he's the only tier 5 offensive player on this list, Rudy Gobert is still a perennial defensive player of the year caliber player and isn't a total black hole on the offensive end, as he does have a true shooting percentage that nearly leads the league every season, despite bringing very little self-creation, usage, or playmaking ability. Either way, his rim protection and ability to prevent teams from taking shots at the rim is league best. Rudy Gobert at number 45. Although it's been a couple seasons since he's last played, when he did in 2022, LaMelo Ball had a 34% assist rate with a 2.3 assist to turnover ratio, on high usage at 27%, with slightly below league average true shooting percentage. He does profile as a solid offensive creator and a tier 3 offensive player, despite not giving much on defense, he does rank highly on these rankings. Paulo Banchero last season had a usage rate close to 30%, although Paulo Banchero's usage rate last season was close to 30%, with a 25% assist rate with a 1.7 assist to turnover ratio. He does struggle with shooting efficiency, however, a lot of that can be argued with the poor spacing of his team. Paulo also gives solid rim protection and is a decent one-on-one big defender. This ranks him as a tier 3 offensive player with solid defensive contributions. Despite playing on a horrible team last season, Cade Cunningham still managed a 36% assist rate with a 2.2 assist to turnover ratio. This level of playmaking is very rare in any players, let alone a 22-year-old with the worst offensive ecosystem in the league. His true shooting percentage, although did struggle, a lot of that had to do with said poor spacing. 30% usage rate is very strong indicators. Very few players have the playmaking volume along with the total usage volume of Cade Cunningham. Hopefully this next season doesn't go as poor for him. He is ranked as a tier 3 offensive player who doesn't bring much to the defensive side of the floor. Herb Jones provided the largest discrepancy between my list and ESPN's. He had a 64% shooting percentage last year, although on low volume, and a 2.1 assist to turnover ratio, although on low volume. Either way, he provides all NBA caliber defense from the wing position and amazing versatility. This alone parlays Herb Jones into a top 40 spot, in my opinion. Last season, Jarrett Allen had a 66 true shooting percentage, which would tell you that he's a only shoot around the rim big. However, he had a large diet of mid-range jump shots last year and a good amount of self-created looks. He also has solid playmaking ability at assist rate at 13% with a 1.7 assist to turnover ratio. This combined with his solid defensive ability and good switchability puts him into a top 40 spot, while only being a tier 4 offensive player. While providing volume scoring, last season at a 58.5 true shooting percentage, DeMar DeRozan also had a 22% assist rate at a 3.1 assist to turnover ratio. This combination of self-creation and creation for others is very rare in today's NBA. Despite concerns about his spacing ability and defensive ability, DeMar DeRozan comes in as a high tier 3 offensive player, pushing him to the top 40 of this list. Despite not making a top 50 list for ESPN, Desmond Bane still graded as a tier 3 offensive player due to his true shooting percentage, although taking a dip, was still 59% this past season, while increasing his usage rate to 27%. Desmond Bane also added a new facet of his game, with assist rate at 27% with assist to turnover ratio at 2. This new development in his game, along with solid defensive ability, ranks him towards the top of this list. While being labeled the best shooting big man of all time, last season Karl-Anthony Towns backed that up with a 63% true shooting rate at a 27% usage rate. Although I do have concerns about his 15% assist rate on a 1 assist to turnover ratio, I think a lot of that can be attributed to having double big lineups last season in Minnesota. Hopefully this next season, Karl-Anthony Towns can really tap into that tier 3 offensive player while not giving up too much more back on defense. Despite being traded to Indiana in the midst of the Tyrese Halliburton injury saga, Pascal Siakam made the Pacers a better offense last season with a 19% assist rate and a 25% usage rate with very solid passing and scoring efficiencies. He also parlays this with a solid defensive ability, being able to switch 3 and 4 and provide solid rim protection. Pascal Siakam is a versatile defensive tier 3 offensive player. Although he's commonly been referred to a role player, Although being commonly known as a role player throughout his career, last season Derek White was very far from that. 61% true shooting percentage with a 3.4 assist to turnover ratio is amazing efficiency. His volume being solid at 21% assist rate and 19% usage rate. Derek White jumps from a tier 4 offensive player into 35th on this list due to his defensive ability being able to guard 1 through 3 point of attack and providing solid rim protection, which is elite from the guard position. Last season, Jalen Williams probably found Last season, Jalen Williams possibly found the Goldilocks point between volume and efficiency. 20% assist rate to 2.6 assist to turnover ratio profiles him as a very solid passer. Additionally, 62% shooting percentage with a 23% usage rate profiles him as a very solid second option. Jalen Williams' ranking as a tier 3 offensive player is also propped up by his solid defensive versatility despite not making a huge box score impact. Despite a lot going wrong for the Philadelphia 76ers last season, Tyrese Maxey still managed to take the next step forward as an offensive player. His assist rate improving to 26% is very solid, but when compared to a 3.7 assist to turnover ratio is elite. He also compares that with league average scoring efficiency with rather high volume at 27%. This being said, Tyrese Maxey ranks as a tier 3 offensive player, bordering on the top 30. The Boston Celtics really took the league by storm last season. A big part of this was Kristaps Porzingis, who boasted a 65% shooting percentage last year. Although a lot of these looks were not super easy looks with a high diet of post-ups, leading him to having a 25% usage rate last season. The only concerns with his offensive game for me are his 10% assist rate being very low with a not inspiring 1.3 assist to turnover ratio. This being said, despite him being a tier 4 offensive player, he does provide very solid rim protection, although being a little slight on the rebounding side of things. Either way, ranking him at 32. Despite a bunch of weird lineup experiments last season, Zion Williamson still managed a 61% shooting percentage on 29% usage rate. Additionally, he was a solid passer with a 1.8 assist to turnover ratio at a 26% assist rate. Zion profiles as one of the better easy basket creators. Even if he doesn't provide much on the defensive side of the floor, he is still a tier 2 offensive player, ranking him at 30. A 17% usage rate with a 1.5 assist to turnover ratio combined with league average scoring efficiency bumps Jaylen Brown to be a lower tier 3 offensive player. This being said, his all-around defensive game, being able to guard point of attack 1 through 4 and have decent off-ball defensive ability, bumps Jaylen Brown up to the 30th spot despite his offensive shortcomings. Despite the precedent being he doesn't care about the regular season, a 63% true shooting percentage led all tier 3 offensive wings last season. Jimmy Butler also has a 2.9 assist to turnover ratio, being very elite to go with a solid 23% assist rate. Although if this was playoff Jimmy Butler, his defensive ability would probably lead him into the top 15. Right now, Jimmy Butler in the regular season is more around the 29 range. With offensive versatility being the primary focus of the Thunder's offense, Chet's spacing ability and 63% true shooting percentage is very integral to their offensive ecosystem. He also garners a solid usage percentage of 21% and a respectable line for a non-shot creating big man. Chet Holmgren's main focus as a tier 4 offensive player is his defensive ability. He brings a lot on the rim protecting aspect of the game, although he does struggle to rebound the ball a little bit. Contrary to normal, the 2024 Kings really struggled to shoot the basketball. This in turn really affected the true shooting percentage of De'Aaron Fox, which dropped steadily, although it still maintained league average on 30% usage rate. He also had a very solid passing season, 2.1 assist to turnover ratio with a 24% assist rate, although it had been much higher in past seasons. This being said, De'Aaron Fox ranks as a low-end tier 2 offensive player. Okay. With a 30% assist rate last season and a 3 assist to turnover ratio, it can be argued that Jamal Murray's passing ability combined with his slightly above average true shooting percentage and 27% usage rate is closer to a tier 1 offensive player. However, it can be very easily argued that his efficiency and passing efficiency greatly decreases when Nikola Jokic goes off the floor. This being said, Jamal Murray still bundles in as a very solid Tier 2 offensive player. As a rookie center last season, Victor Wembanyama had a 31% usage rate, which is absurdly high. This being said, he still maintained a league average shooting percentage with very high passing volume of 21%. This being said, he really struggled as an efficient passer with a 1 assist to turnover ratio. This gives me enough doubt to rank him as only a Tier 4 offensive player. He does, however, bring absurd rim protection. If you look at his numbers last season without Luka Doncic, it would be very hard to argue Kyrie Irving not to be at the top of a Tier 2 offensive player. Overall, in totality last season, his 23% assist rate on 2.8 assist to turnover ratio with 61% true shooting on 27% usage profiles him to be a very high Tier 2 offensive player who doesn't give much on defense but still ranks in the 24th spot. This past season was a step down for Damian Lillard. That being said, he was still one of the higher ranking Tier 2 offensive players last season with an assist rate close to 29% and a 2.6 assist to turnover ratio with 59% true shooting on 27% usage. If Damian Lillard were to return to his former form, it would be very hard to not argue him to be a Tier 1 offensive player. James Harden boasted the lowest usage percent of any Tier 1, 2, or 3 offensive player. This being said, he had a 34% assist rate with a 3.3 assist to turnover ratio on 61% true shooting percentage. Those numbers, passing volume, passing efficiency, and scoring volume, are almost undeniable, ranking him as a Tier 2 offensive player towards the very top of Tier 2. In 2023, Ja Morant's assist rate was 41% and his usage rate was 34%. These numbers could argue that he was towards the top of Tier 1 as an offensive player. He also boasted a solid 2.4 assist rate. The kicker here is his true shooting percentage is well below league average. Part of this having to do with his poor offensive ecosystem where he really had to carry the Grizzlies to the 15th ranked offense. This being said, Ja Morant ranks as a high Tier 2 offensive player. While other Tier 4 offensive centers made their way onto this list with high true shooting percentage and rim protection, Bam Adebayo's combination of defensive versatility and 19% assist rate on 1.7 assist turnover ratio makes him a very interesting case as a top 20 candidate. He provides the best defensive flexibility from the center position, ability to guard 1 through 5, and still provides solid rim protection and solid individual scoring ability. In playing his highest amount of games dating back to San Antonio, Kawhi Leonard flashed some of his skills that have made him an elite player ever since then. His 63% true shooting percentage is almost unheard of from a wing player at a 26% usage rate. He also flashed a solid passing ability in low volume at a 2 assist to turnover ratio to a 17% assist rate. This ranking him as a Tier 3 player is boosted up a little bit, although not as much as before, with his solid on-ball defensive ability, with his off-ball defensive game quite declining these past couple seasons. While his 24% assist rate and 1.7 assist to turnover ratio leaves him short of being a Tier 1 offensive player, Anthony Edwards' scoring volume at 31% usage rate with league average scoring efficiency makes him a Tier 2 offensive player. This being said, he also has a solid defensive ability, which helps push him into the 18th spot on my list. Past season, Trae Young had the highest passing volume in the entire NBA, combining that with a 2.5 assist to turnover ratio. Although he is a little lacking in true shooting percentage, he still has high usage and profiles as a Tier 1 offensive player. Unfortunately, that's where the good conversation ends for Trae Young, his defense pushing him down the list quite a bit, still ranking him as the 17th best player in my rankings. Although on the surface level, Paul George's assist rates and assist to turnovers are a little short of a Tier 2 offensive player, last season when James Harden was off the floor, those numbers increased. Additionally, his true shooting percentage increased from 61% to 65% with higher usage. Paul George, ranking as a tier 2 offensive player with a very, very good defensive game on and off the ball, ranks him as the 16th best player. Although his 63% true shooting percentage is in line with his prime seasons, Kevin Durant's individual scoring game has taken a dip. Because of this, his assist rate and his assist efficiency has taken a steep decline. If you adjust to when Devin Booker is off the floor, his assist to turnover ratio drops towards 1. This being said, Kevin Durant is a mid tier 2 offensive player who provides solid help defense, although not much individual on ball defensive ability, ranking him as the 15th best player on my rankings. Although, at first sight, Steph Curry's passing numbers are quite short of most of the Tier 1 thresholds, if you look at Draymond Green's assist rate when Steph Curry goes to the bench, it declines by 6%. These declines are not seen with other offensive players such as Damian Lillard, Kyrie Irving, or Jamal Murray. This being said, if you count that 6%, Steph Curry easily profiles as a Tier 1 offensive player, combining that improved passing ability with a 62% true shooting percentage and 31% usage rate. This profiles Steph Curry as a mid tier 1 offensive player who has taken a couple steps back defensively, ranking him as the 14th best player. Similarly to Steph Curry, Donovan Mitchell misses the passing threshold of a tier 1 offensive player. However, if you look at his numbers when Darius Garland is off the floor last season, Donovan Mitchell's assist rate does clear the threshold while improving his assist to turnover ratio and not touching his true shooting percentage and increasing his usage percentage. This being said, it can be inferred without much doubt that Donovan Mitchell is a tier 1 offensive player who doesn't give quite back as much defensively as Steph Curry or Trae Young. Past season, Devin Booker improved as a passer with a 30% assist rate and a 2.7 assist to turnover ratio. He also maintained a 29% usage rate and a 61% true shooting percentage. Additionally, if you put him into context with other tier 1 offensive guards, he ranks as one of the better defensive players. This being said, Devin Booker ranks as the 12th best player on my rankings. This past season, the Sacramento Kings had the 13th ranked defensive rating, a large part of this being Domantas Sabonis' ability to secure defensive rebounds. Other than that, on the offensive side of the floor, he had a 33% assist rate on a 2.5 assist to turnover ratio with an absurd 64% true shooting percentage. The real case against Sabonis being a tier 1 offensive player is his usage rate of only being 22%, which would be the lowest of a tier 1 offensive player. This being said, Domantas Sabonis is the highest ranking tier 2 offensive player, and he does give a good bit of value to the Sacramento Kings on the defensive side of the floor. At the ripe age of 40 years old, LeBron James still mustered up a 36% assist rate on a 2.4 assist to turnover ratio. This being combined with his 36% true shooting percentage on a 28.5 usage rate profiles him as a medium tier 1 offensive player. This being said, he doesn't give too much on the defensive side of the floor, but still maintains a high rank at the age of 40 years old. Being the highest ranking tier 2 offensive player, Jayson Tatum still provides a solid offensive game with a 60% true shooting percentage and a 30% usage rate. This being said, his 21% assist rate and a 1.9 assist to turnover ratio does leave him quite a bit short of a tier 1 offensive player. This being said, he is still one of the 20 best defensive players in the league, being able to realistically guard 1 through 5. Jayson Tatum is an amazing switchable defensive player and deserves of a top 10 spot. With his 62% true shooting percentage, a 26% usage rate, and solid passing, 15% assist rate with a 1.5 assist turnover ratio, Anthony Davis profiles as one of the highest tier 3 offensive players. This being said, he also brings the switchability that Bam Adebayo brings on the defensive side of the floor with a lot of the same rim protecting qualities that Gobert brings. This ranking Anthony Davis is the highest ranked tier 3 player and as the 8th best player on my rankings. This past season, Tyrese Halliburton had a 44% assist rate with Tyrese Halliburton's 24% usage rate is a good bit short of a tier 1 offensive player. However, in an injury-riddled season, he had a 44% usage rate on a 4.73 assist-to-turnover ratio and 61% true shooting percentage. Those other three numbers are very undeniable and makes me look past his rather low usage rate, which decreased throughout the season as he dealt with injuries. Tyrese Halliburton is a tier 1 offensive player and the 7th ranked player on my rankings. Jalen Brunson had a 31% usage rate this past season with a 59% true shooting percentage. He interestingly didn't put up high passing counting numbers. Either way, a 32% assist rate and a 2.8 assist to turnover ratio combined with the eye test profiles him to be one of the better passers in the league. This being said, his ability to initiate not just for himself but for his teammates profiles him to be a high tier 1 offensive player. His 30 Shai Gilgeous-Alexander misses the assist rate threshold of a tier 1 offensive player by just a little bit. However, his 32% usage rate, 64% true shooting percentage, and 2.9 assist to turnover ratio makes me shed a blind eye without having to do any lineup exceptions. Additionally, unlike Brunson and Halliburton, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander does at least provide a little bit of defensive playmaking to the Thunder's defensive scheme. Although he is not an absolute great defensive player, he's still a tier 1 offensive player who is a neutral on defense, ranking him at 5th. This past season, Giannis Antetokounmpo possibly had his best offensive season of his career. His 31% assist rate and 1.9 assist to turnover ratio profiles him as a very, very good passer. Additionally, a 65% true shooting percentage on 32% usage is elite scoring numbers. Additionally, although his rim protection doesn't as much aspire a Defensive Player of the Year candidate anymore, he still had a very solid defensive season and still is a very good help defensive player. This past season, Luka Doncic had a 36% usage rate and was towards the top of the league in time of possession. This combining with his 43% usage rate and 2.4 assist to turnover ratio means he helped his team limit turnovers a lot and generated a lot of assists, this being powered by his 62% true shooting percentage and a very diverse offensive game. Luka Doncic's offensive ability ranks him towards the top of a tier 1 offensive player, while giving still a little bit back on the defensive side of the floor. Joel Embiid had a 39% usage rate this past season. With this, he was still extremely efficient, 64% true shooting percentage, and had a 31% assist rate, which was a career high. He still maintained solid passing efficiency, although it is the worst out of every tier 1 offensive player. Joel Embiid also provides very solid at the rim protection and rim deterrence. Joel Embiid is a tier 1 offensive player who still gives a good bit on the defensive side of the floor. My number 1 player is Nikola Jokic. His assist volume is in line with Trae Young and Luka Doncic at the top of the league. His assist to turnover ratio is in line with conservative floor generals. His true shooting percentage is in line with run jumping bigs, and usage rates in line with number 1 scoring options. Additionally, he brings a good bit to the defensive side of the floor. Similar to Sabonis, Nikola Jokic is one of the best defensive rebounders in the league, which greatly impacts Denver's offense. Additionally, he has one of the higher ranks in on-off rim attempts by the opposing team, which are the most efficient shots in basketball, which is where Nikola Jokic brings most of his value on the defensive side of the floor. Enough being said, he is a tier 1 offensive player.